Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and I am so excited for this new guest. This is a dude who just started the channel very recently. He got into my on my radar a few weeks ago, and he's kind of doing the same thing I'm doing. And I kind of like what I really like the work he's doing. So I reached out to this guy because I thought, I like what he's doing. I think you're getting close to 200 subscribers now, which
nearly 200.
Which, hey, you're ahead of my pace, man. It took me like 2.5, 3 months to get to 100 subscribers, and you've been doing this for like 2 months now, right?
Yeah, about 2 months now. But
yeah,
it's the long game, isn't it? You have to be consistent.
Yeah, because, well, before we start talking, I got to introduce. This is my bud who has a podcast called Mormonism with the Murph. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Stephen. Thanks for having me on your program.
So, this is part of the MMR segment that's part of Mormon Book Reviews, where I like to highlight podcasters, up-and-coming podcasters, film directors. We do movie reviews, Under the Banner of Heaven after show like I did with Rebecca. That all falls under the MMR. We've been doing this all along. We're not changing the channel. It's just we want to be able to differentiate. So what's that?
I was thinking that beforehand. I was like, MMR? Did he change the name of his podcast?
Yeah. You're like, what's going on? And like, no, it's on Mormon Book Reviews. So either way, I reached out to you. I was like, okay, I want to hear this guy's story because I really don't know much about you until we started talking last week. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, I want you to come on my program. I want you to tell me what your podcast is all about and what made you decide to do it. And then I want to give you some background. So, and by the way, folks, you just released an interview with Dan Vogel. And then last week you had Brian Hales. So you're lining up some pretty big names, which I think is really cool.
No, I was super pumped about getting both Brian and Dan to come on and just have a really good, transparent dialogue about, things with the truth claims and church history. So yeah, super pumped about those interviews.
Yeah, and so, folks, this is an up-and-coming guy. Keep an eye out for him. But before we get there, before we get to your podcast, I always like to get a little background from my guests. Where are you located at, by the way?
So I live in Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. I live in a very small place called Portadown. So it's about 40 minutes southwest of Belfast.
Okay. And that's pretty cool. And what's it like being in Northern Ireland today? I'm just curious because, of course, I grew up with the Troubles. Yeah. And then you had the Good Friday Accords that were signed in 1999, which in essence finally ended the war between the Catholics and the Protestants that's been raging in Europe for centuries. What's it like there now?
It's a lot calmer. There's still parades that would happen, every July and such, but there's not really the same contention as there, was during my early childhood, although I was, 3 during the Good Friday Agreement, so I didn't experience much of the Troubles, but my family, my parents experienced it. But no, it's a good place to live in some ways, but the weather's kind of rubbish. It's always wet or rainy or cloudy. But it's a very small country. Like, see, even when you go to England, I've been to America and Canada, and it's such a small country.
Yeah. That's everything's that I was talking to Matthew Gill about it. And he's like, I said, oh yeah, he likes to go to Orlando. And I'm like, well, I'm only a few hours away, a couple hours away. We can meet up. He's like, that's with you Americans. Like, you think 2 or 3 hour drive is nothing. And then for us, it's like, we never do that.
For me, it's like the bottom of my country.
So, yeah, that's really cool. And then, of course, you date me because I'm like, you're 3 years old when they signed the Good Friday Accords in 1999. So I feel like I'm so old. But either way, it's all good. And that's why I'm here, because honestly, I want to be able to highlight people that are up and coming like you. I think you're doing a really good work. And so you're from Northern Ireland.
Yep.
And just tell me about being raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right. So, yeah, so I was born and raised in the church. My mom, she was born into the church. So my grandparents, on my mom's side, they were converts. My mom was super faithful. She was primary president. She served a mission. She went to the Bristol, Wales mission. She's also served as like a young women's president and Relief Society seminary teacher. My dad, he was a convert to the church, so he joined in his early 20s. He grew up sort of Protestant Presbyterian was his faith. So he converted. He had a friend who was a member of the church, and who gave him the Book of Mormon. He took the missionary discussions. According to my dad, what he's told me, he said that he felt the Spirit during the first vision discussion, which I think was the first lesson at the time. So he got baptized. I don't think he told his family until after he got baptized. So they had some issues with it, I think, but they've been generally quite accepting and supportive. He went on a mission to Canada, Winnipeg, and then met my mum after. They got married and had 3 kids. So then I came along. But no, I had a good, probably normal childhood, went to primary. We would have done scripture study, family home evening, maybe not like every night. We weren't perfect at it. But yeah, would have went to church on Sundays and then went to young men's and seminary. I wouldn't have said that I was a spiritual child. I wouldn't say I had a testimony, growing up in the church. I wasn't really sure about, what I believe with regards to, Jesus or Joseph Smith. But I would say as a child, I'd had small experiences with prayer. So I did believe that there was a God or that Heavenly Father, answered my prayers in just, simple ways. Like, if I needed to try to find a lost toy or couldn't find my ball or couldn't find where my homework was. And, I was taught, like, if you say a prayer and ask Heavenly Father, he'll help you to find it. And then, so then I'd pray. And so I think my screen just froze there.
It's all right. We can power through this. There we go.
Oh, there we go. I'm back.
Before we I just want to get back because it's an interesting story. One thing that's interesting, of course, Northern Ireland growing up, it's highly sectarian. Like during your parents' era, highly sectarian. You either were Catholic, you were Protestant.
Yeah.
Now, where did the Mormons fit in that area? Like, how are they at that time? If your parents maybe probably can give you better perspective on this, but like, how are Mormons viewed during these highly sectarian times?
So I lived in England for 6 years between the ages of 6 and 12. Whenever I came back at age 12, so I didn't really know much about the Protestant versus Catholic rhetoric. But one of the first questions I was asked at school is, "Are you a Protestant or a Catholic?" And I was like, "I'm a Mormon." And then they're like, "Well, are you a Catholic Mormon or are you a Protestant Mormon?" And I was like, "I don't know." So it's not even so much about religion as it's which political side are you on. But Northern Ireland is predominantly Protestant. It's mostly Protestant, but there is Catholic areas. But there even has been a bit of tension or divide in some wards over, your political sort of background.
I'll bet. That's interesting. So let's get back. So you're saying that you, growing up as a young man, you found that you believed that there was a God because he would answer your prayers. Highly experiential. I recognize. Look, I come from a charismatic background, which is also a very highly experiential faith tradition. And so whenever I talk to Mormons, I'm like, okay, you're speaking the same language. I'm familiar with this. And to some more conservative charismatics, that might give them pause. But I find that fascinating. So you felt growing up, there's a God. You're going through you get baptized when you're 8, I'm assuming, and all this kind of stuff.
I did, yeah.
Okay, let's just continue with the story.
Yeah, so I would have had those mini experiences, but I would say that I would only have prayed to God if I needed help. I was kind of a selfish child.
Got it.
And it was almost like magic. I'd pray and then I would get this thought, look here, check there. And then I'd find it, and people would roll their eyes, like the God of lost keys or the God of lost objects. But I remember after thinking it worked. Like God's almost like a genie in a way. But then there would have been no thank you. There wouldn't have been, let's just talk and get to know each other. So I would have just been almost using God if I needed help. But I had a really good childhood. I was really into, sports and had lots of friends. Whenever I was 12, so when we moved back to Northern Ireland, I experienced probably the first trial in my life. I started at a brand new secondary school, didn't know any of the kids. So it was kind of an intimidating experience. And I felt like really scared, and you're a teenager, so you feel shy, self-conscious, and I had a really hard time fitting in. And long story short, I experienced a lot of bullying over those couple of years, and it was quite a hard time and a lonely time in my life where I felt a lot of emotional suffering and and loneliness. And I kind of felt like, I'm a good kid. Why is this happening to me? I do remember praying to God at one point, being like, why is this happening? Like, if I'm your child, like, why am I going through this? Like, please take this away. So it was when I was around the age of 14, the missionaries reached out to me and they took me for young men's activity. And then they had a Preach My Gospel, which is kind of like the missionary manual for teaching the lessons and how to be a missionary. But they invited me to study the missionary lessons and to sort of gain a testimony for myself. So at this point, I think I did have that desire. I was 14, I was a little bit more mature than I was as a child. And I think because of this trial, I kind of wanted to turn towards God. So I was reading, the missionary lessons, I was studying the scriptures, and for the first time, I felt like I was starting to understand the gospel and the plan of salvation in Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And it all just rang true, both in my heart and in my mind. It made sense, it felt right. And even though I was raised in the church, it almost felt like that was my conversion experience. And so then I went on to do Mormonized Promise. I felt like I believed my faith was growing, but I want that spiritual witness. So I did Mormonized Promise, asked with a sincere heart, real intent, are these things true? At age 14, I felt like I received a spiritual manifestation. It was true. So I felt like I received, that burning in the bosom, that testimony. But also during this period, I felt like I really came to know the Savior in a more personal, intimate way, and that his atonement wasn't just that he suffered for our sins, but I felt peace and comfort that he knew exactly the suffering and the sadness and the anxiety and things that I was struggling with, that he had experienced that. The Book of Mormon talked about that. I remember a statement in Preach My Gospel that said that all that's like unfair about this life will be made right through his atonement. So really during that time, I felt like I came to know the Savior more personally and felt his love and his grace, and also healing, that I felt slowly I was able to overcome the issues that I was struggling with. And there's scripture I love in Ether 12 that talks about how the Lord gives us weaknesses so we can be humble, but that he can, if we have faith in him and humble ourselves, he can turn our weaknesses into strengths. And there are so many things that I learned, from that particular trial in my life, but that's really where I, gained my testimony.
Well, let me ask you, you said you were 14 years old when this happened. Did you feel like a special kinship with a young 14-year-old farm boy in upstate New York?
Yeah, I did.
I'll bet.
Joseph Smith, I felt like I really related to him. I can remember one night reading the 1838, his history, both of the first vision and of the visitation of the angel, and it all just rung true to me. And I did feel that connection to Joseph Smith, and he was always my favorite prophet, growing up in the church.
Yeah, it seems like that seems to be, everybody resonates with Joseph so much, and it's very sincere. And so you have this spiritual experience when you're 14, you're growing in your faith. What's next? You serve your mission, or what's the next step in your journey?
So, I continue to, to go to church activities. I went on temple trips, EFYs. I would say I continue to have spiritual experiences, and, my testimony was strong. At age 18, one of my close friends, we grew up in youth together. He was always like a little brother to me. He had a near-death experience where he almost died to a severe asthma attack. He went into cardiac arrest, and he was brought into ICU, and he very nearly died. And that was a moment that really shook me emotionally. And it was one of those times where I felt like completely helpless. And I was 18 at the time, so it was getting close to going on a mission. And ever since I received my testimony at 14, the plan was to go on a mission. But as it was getting closer to the time, I didn't want to go. I was getting cold feet, the thought of like, do I really want to leave my friends and my family for 2 years? No movies, no video games, no sports, and I'll be going to a foreign country and have to talk to strangers, about the church and the gospel. And I was like, that sounds awful. And I felt like I didn't want to go, but at the same time, I felt like, it was part of God's plan. But anyway, so whenever I was confused about whether I should go on a mission, I remember going to my room and praying for my friend, and we were told that the doctor said he wasn't going to live. And it was one of those really humble prayers where I just prayed to God in just desperation that he would help save my best friend, or it wasn't my best friend, but my friend's life. That it just felt wrong that he was going to die. Like, how could this happen? It was just a freak accident. And, you know, I believe that God answered prayers. I believe he was God of miracles. And I remember saying that prayer and getting this feeling or this prompting that he was going to live, and that I needed to get my family, and we fasted and prayed for him. And that was a really sacred and spiritual time where we were just reading the scriptures, reading about the miracles of Jesus, and really exercising faith. But long story short, my friend, he didn't pass away. He did live, and the doctor said, you know, he's never gonna talk again. You know, he started to talk, and then he said he'd never walk again. And he can walk with a little bit of assistance, but it has impacted his physical mobility since then. You know, he's not fully recovered, so it's not a complete miracle, but to me, that was a miracle. And I said in my prayer that if you save his life, I'll give mine to yours. I'll go on a mission. You know, I'll give my life to you. I'll serve if you save his life. And then when that happened, I knew that I needed to repay my end of the deal. So yeah, I went on a mission at age 19, and I went to Canada Alberta mission, or Canada Calgary mission.
Oh, okay. So now your father, what you said, was in Winnipeg, right?
Yeah.
So you guys got a Canadian connection. So what was it like going to the Great White North? I mean, that's pretty wild out there in Canada.
It was awesome. I arrived in summertime, so it was actually really hot.
Oh, sure.
I got so badly sunburned. It was like 30 plus degrees the first few weeks. Just a beautiful country. I love the people. The scenery's beautiful as well. I got to go to Banff and Waterton National Park, and one of my areas was in British Columbia, so I was just living in the mountains. I got to see loads of animals, and honestly, my mission was just a great experience. And I went out with really strong missionary zeal. Like, I wanted to talk to everybody about the gospel. I wasn't afraid to knock doors or talk to people on the streets. And in ways, I felt that it was the Lord was with me, and I had the Spirit with me, because I struggled with confidence and with anxiety growing up. But as a missionary, I felt like that inner confidence, and I truly felt like I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. We have the truth. I want to bring people into the church, teach them about the plan of salvation. And like, I experienced some hard things on my mission, some disappointments, but in general, it was a very faith promoting experience that sort of solidified my testimony and my conversion in the church.
So how many people did you baptize on your mission?
We had 6 baptisms.
Okay.
So it wasn't too bad. It's kind of a hard mission. In Canada, there was a lot of rejection, but yeah, we had 6 baptisms, and they're all really awesome people. And I just loved all the members and people you got to visit with. Like, you really made amazing connections with people that you would never have thought possible.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is Calgary is, or Alberta itself, province, is a pretty conservative area. It also has a sizable evangelical community that lives there. I was just wondering, did you have any interactions with evangelicals? Yeah,
well, so especially in my first area, because we did a lot of tracting at the start of my mission, the mission emphasized doing more member work and trying to work with like less actives and part member families. But at the start, it was pretty much all door knocking. So I met a lot of Christians, a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses. So I did get into some Bible bashes or debates. Some of them were friendly and some of them were a bit hostile. Most of the time, I felt like they didn't know the Bible that well. So we were able to win the debates. But there was a couple of guys who knew the Bible so much better than me. I remember this one guy. We were debating if Jesus is Jehovah, and obviously the Latter-day Saint view was, Jesus Christ is the premortal Jehovah, the Jehovah of the Old Testament. And then he showed me a scripture in Psalms. So Jehovah is the big capitalized Lord, and the small Lord sits on his right hand. And then he showed me how in the New Testament, a scripture, I think it was in Acts, how Jesus sits on the right hand of God. And I remember just being like, I don't know how to respond to that. I'm like, he's right. And I was like, he's beaten me with the Bible. So we would have had a few like discussions with people. But yeah, more at the start of my mission.
Okay, that's cool. So it was more, it sounds like you were getting into debates more with Jehovah's Witnesses than just about anybody.
Jehovah's Witnesses, or some people would say, oh, I'm Catholic, but
Okay.
they wouldn't really be good at defending their beliefs. But there was one Protestant guy that we taught a few lessons to, and he was actually a really nice guy. We played, what do you call that nerdy game? Dungeons and Dragons with him on a P-Day once. And he was super nice, but he, couldn't accept, he was quoting all the scriptures about, saved by grace through faith, not of work. So we had a lot of discussions, but in general, didn't encounter anything that really troubled my faith as a missionary. I did notice a few things from studying the Book of Mormon carefully. I noticed that a lot of Mormon doctrine isn't in the Book of Mormon. And I kind of wondered that if it contains the fullness of the gospel, why is there nothing about kingdoms of glory, or why is there no mention of baptisms for the dead, or the endowment, or men becoming gods? And I also noticed some passages that seemed sort of Trinitarian, referring to Jesus as both the Father and the Son. And I was like, wait a minute, like, why is it saying this? Actually, I remember a really funny lesson. We did a lesson with this Catholic, and we were teaching about Joseph Smith and the first vision, how he saw two separate beings. And we gave her a scripture passage to read in 35:11, and it talked about how they're one. And she was quoting this verse to almost to support her beliefs. And I was like, you can't use our book against us here.
Well, she if as a Catholic, if she pulled out the 1830 edition and then quoted how Mary is the mother of God, that was later changed to the mother of the Son of God, she would have really nailed you guys there.
Oh yeah, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, pretty wild stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. The Book of Mormon is a fascinating document because it is, in one sense, I say it's a thoroughly Christian book. It's a thoroughly Protestant book. And so I think that's and like you said, there are, as you do research, you realize that, the Book of Mormon is like the most important, that's the calling card of Mormonism, but yet it has very little Mormon doctrine in it, which is just, I always find that to be a fascinating place.
Yeah, and it didn't cause me to question my faith. There were just wee things that I observed. I guess I will quickly mention, I did experience one moment of a faith crisis on my mission.
Okay.
I won't go into the personal details, but there was a young woman from back home who I felt strongly and felt like I'd received spiritual confirmations that she was the right girl and that I would marry her. And long story short, she married someone else on my mission. And that was my first faith crisis, and it was nothing to do with church history.
Right.
It was, I thought God had told me, I thought I'd received an answer from the Spirit, a revelation confirming she was the right one, but she married someone else. And then I was like, well, how can if I felt as strong about her as I did about my experience with Joseph Smith, with the church being true, I was like, how do I really know if Joseph Smith is a prophet then? How can I say that I know the Book of Mormon is true if it was a similar spiritual confirmation, but it didn't come to pass? And that was one of those moments where I was out just over a year, and I had a choice either to sort of turn away from God or turn towards him in faith, despite feeling let down, because I couldn't deny some of the experiences I'd had growing up, but I felt very confused and misled in some ways.
So
my first faith crisis, and it was nothing to do with church history. On my mission. Now,
this is what's so interesting, because kind of leads to where we're heading, which is you get back and just tell us a little bit about, you come back to your mission, tell us how your life proceeds, and then let's get to the point where you decide you want to do this podcast or this YouTube channel.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, I got back about 5 years ago. I came home with strong return missionary zeal. I was serving as ward mission leader. I was in the YSC presidency. I was young men's president as well. So my mum, she passed away shortly after I got home from my mission. She was very ill with lung fibrosis. So after she passed away, it kind of brought my family together, and it was a sad but a very sacred time. And I also felt like I dealt with the grief and received a lot of closure about her death, and I felt really at peace that I'll see her again. Her sufferings come to an end. She's in heaven, and my mom was super faithful to the end. Like, she wasn't just somebody who was faithful, on a Sunday, or she really did live her faith. She would always have read her scriptures, and she was just a truly Christ-like, saintly person. So even though that was a tough time, it was one that brought our family together, and it really helped my faith. But one of my sisters had left the church and lost her faith over church history, and because I really wanted to help her and to bring her back, I started talking to her. And in order to help someone, you have to know their concerns and try to resolve them. But up until this point, I didn't really know much about church history or any issues with truth claims. I knew that blacks didn't have the priesthood until 1978. I knew there was multiple accounts of the first vision. He had a seer stone, but I didn't know really anything. I didn't go searching for anything. But she started sharing with me some of her concerns, telling me things like, Joseph Smith drank wine in Carthage jail. And I'm just like, what? I'm like, no, he didn't. I'm like, where are you getting this nonsense from? And then she would show me sources in the history of the church, journal discourses, which then caused me to sort of go down the rabbit hole. And she showed me a podcast of Grant Palmer. So I was listening to a lot of his interviews, Sandra Tanner, Mormon Stories, Dan Vogel, C.S. Letter. I ordered Grant Palmer's book, Insider's View of Mormon Origins. And within the space of a couple of months, my testimony was just shattered. I think I was so 100%, it's all true. The scripture is 100% true. Everything a prophet says is true. And I had this really whitewashed, idealistic view of Joseph Smith as this really righteous hero of a prophet. And then there's this other part of the history that I felt the church had hidden. And I didn't know how to combat or reconcile all those issues. So long story short, I tried meeting with my stake president, and we had discussions about things, and I tried looking at apologetics, but it just wasn't working. So I completely lost my faith in Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. I think.
And how long ago was this? Roughly?
This was November, December 2018. So that would have been nearly 4 years ago.
Okay.
But I still believed in God. I still believed in Jesus. I still believed that God would answer my prayers. But I think the way that I had interpreted my other spiritual experiences is those were emotional feelings I had based on the information. But the information I've been told wasn't the full accurate history. So I went through a few months where I wasn't believing in the church, but I was still believing in God. I ordered I think it was the NIV of the Bible and read the New Testament myself. I was going to Christian churches, investigating those. I was dating a Christian girl, and I was very close to becoming a Christian. We were going like this Presbyterian.
Oh, really?
Church.
Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
I was, investigating about things to do with the Trinity, because I struggle with understanding. Well, I actually understood the Trinity, and I realized, oh boy, I've been misrepresenting this the whole time as a missionary. I think I've been referring to it more as modalism. Mm-hmm. But I think I struggled to fully accept and join a Christian church. But anyway.
So just so I understand, so you are investigating other Christian churches. You're looking at the Presbyterian Church. You're reading an NIV, which is a very evangelical version of the Bible. It's one of the more popular ones. At this point, would you have thought of yourself as maybe heading towards the evangelical camp?
Yeah. So my dad's side of the family, like I said, they're Protestants, and we had some discussions, and I was reading a lot of those passages talking about like grace through faith, not of works, like in Book of Romans and Galatians. And I'm like, how have I never noticed these passages before? So I was really understanding a lot of their beliefs, and I was also looking at how Mormonism contradicts the Bible. I was looking for problems as well, and I was listening to a lot of different like ministers and different pastors, and people like Jeff Durbin, James White.
Okay.
I never felt like completely, like I never felt like God led me or was telling me that this was the right path for you. I never felt like I got any sort of a spiritual answer, but I think I'd also lost faith in spiritual answers. So anyway, I kind of started then question the Bible, Christianity. There was a Mormon Stories interview with David Bokovoy, and I was starting to almost question all my experiences. And my dad had been sending me some apologetic things, and so I've been listening to them, and I would always beat him if we'd have a debate about the truth claims or the history. But there was one video he sent me that talked about the parallels between the temple endowment and ancient Egyptian temple rituals, and it was by a guy called Bruce Porter. And I didn't want to watch it. I was like, no, it's not true. I don't want to listen to this. But then I was like, you know what? I was open-minded enough to listen to my sister when she shared with me her doubts and concerns. I'm like, I should be open-minded. I should give it a watch. It didn't prove anything to me. I didn't think it was super convincing, but at the same time, there were some parallels that I acknowledged. And I was like, I can understand a true believer. That seems like good evidence. And maybe I just assumed, he had just taken everything from Masonry. End of story. That's all there is. And I didn't realize that there's actually maybe other evidence that from maybe early Christian temple rites or to, Egypt, that it's possible that he could have been inspired. But anyway, someone sent me a talk by Elder Corbridge, and it was entitled Stand Forever. It was a BYU devotional. And he talked about, that people leaving the church over doubts with church history. And he talked about secondary questions and primary questions. And he talked about how, you can be just completely overcome by all these secondary questions, and you could spend a lifetime trying to resolve them. And he said, like, yes, they're important, but the primary questions. And he talked about like the spiritual gloom he felt as he was going through this antagonistic material. And while I felt kind of liberated and it was kind of exciting whenever I was researching the church and whenever I left, I did feel a bit of a loss of identity and a loss of spirituality and connection to God in some ways. And I remember at one point in his talk, he like held up the scriptures and he was like, ask yourselves, ask God, are these lies, delusion, or truth? And I guess I'd come to the conclusion either he was deluded or he was deceiving people. That was sort of my interpretation. But anyway, that prompted me to sincerely fast and pray. And I was going back and forth between critics and apologists. And I kind of came to this point, like, if I believe in God, if I believe there's a God in heaven, if I believe that God can speak to me and can answer my prayers, then I've got to believe that he'll answer me now. And it was like, I'm going to set all my concerns off to one side, all the apologetics, all the problems. And I was like, I need an answer from God, like a big spiritual witness that's more than just a feeling. So it's fasting and praying. And then I opened the scriptures, which I hadn't really read since leaving, or at least, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, but I opened and read in D&C 18. And I would probably describe it as that was probably one of the most powerful spiritual experiences I had. I can't remember the passage off the top of my head, but it essentially said, these are the words of Christ. They're not the words of men or the words of the devil. These are the words of Christ, given by my servant, by my spirit. And you can testify that you've heard my voice and know my words. And then it continued on saying, to repent, have faith in me, keep the commandments. And whenever I read that, I remember just tears streaming down my face. And, the scriptures say that the Spirit enlightens your mind, fills your soul with joy. And that was exactly what I felt as I read it. And I felt it was as if it was the Lord speaking to me, giving me an answer, a revelation. And I believed it was the Spirit. But then after I kind of wrestled with it, I kind of doubted it. I was like, well, maybe it was just elevation emotion or just a coincidence. So then I prayed again for spiritual confirmation. Was it revelation? And I read in D&C 6 where it said, the Lord speaking to Oliver Cowdery in the revelation said, blessed art thou for what thou hast done, for thou hast inquired of me. And as often as thou hast inquired, thou hast received instruction of my spirit. And it said, if it were not so, you would not be at the points where you are at this time. Behold, you know that you've inquired of me, and I did enlighten thy mind. And I tell thee these things, that thou mayest know that thou hast been enlightened by the Spirit of truth. And then later it says, what greater witness can you have than from God? Have I not spoken peace to you? And whenever I read those words, again, it was almost like mind-blowing. It almost felt like it was the Lord speaking directly to me, answering my prayer. And again, it felt like the Spirit enlightening my mind and filled with that joy. So I continued to wrestle, but eventually I had to make the decision to come back and to, am I going to follow this spiritual experience? Because it still took faith. There's still part of me that thought, well, maybe this is just a coincidence. Maybe it's elevation emotion. In my prayers, but God, there's so many problems. How can it be true? And then I was praying for like a sure sign, like let me see an angel, let me see the gold plates, like give me a sure sign. And then I would open the scriptures and then it would read and rebuke me saying, cursed is he who seeks after a sure sign,
sign seeker.
Signs follow those who believe, but faith doesn't come from signs. So long story short, I decided to come back to the church and to have faith again. Whenever I came back, I met my wife, we started dating, and then we got engaged, and I was trying to overcome my doubts because I still had them, right? Like I felt like my shelf crashed, all the books on my shelf.
Yeah.
And that experience was like God giving me a new shelf.
Okay.
But he didn't remove many of the books. And slowly I was trying to find intellectual answers. I was going to faithful sources, Fair Mormon, Saints Unscripted, LDS Truth Claims, Latter-day Saints Q&A. I was Rough Stone Rolling. So I was trying to find more faithful answers, and I was trying to stay away from the more critical stuff, trying to help my faith grow. But over those years, I would say I've continued to have spiritual experiences, faith-promoting experiences that have strengthened my faith in God, that he answers prayers, and that he speaks to me, that he has spoken to me. But then I've also continued to struggle with doubts, struggle with concerns. I've had probably multiple faith crises since then, and it's been hard to reconcile my spiritual experiences with a lot of the things that critics pose with the truth claims and the history. So then leading on to me starting my podcast.
Well, just real quick, what year did you come back into faith in the church? Like where were we on the time?
2019. So I only stopped going for around 6-7 months.
Okay.
So it wasn't a super long period of time. And over the course of the 3 years since I've been back, my faith has kind of been a bit up and down. I would say that I don't have the certain faith that I felt like I had before. I felt like I had a very, I 100% know it's true. I would have said I know it's true.
Yeah.
I had no doubts. And in some ways, I feel like I wish my faith and my testimony could go back to being that strong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that original testimony that I had completely crashed with the concerns with church history and the truth claims. And I almost feel like this new shelf, while I have all these doubts and all these concerns and all this unbelief, that this new shelf that I've been given has almost withstood it. And when it's been near ready to crash at times, it's almost like God's put in another screw. He's given me another experience to help keep that fire going. Sorry, I can't remember what your question was.
Wow, no, that's just interesting. So now you've decided, leading up to this, you're returned back to the church. You still have your doubts. It sounds to me you're still working things out. And sometimes I feel like, okay, like with my channel, I didn't realize it at the time because I could have gone a different direction. But it was weird. Once I started my channel, the idea of my channel starts up, I immediately start having spiritual experiences. And so early on in the process, before I even taped my first video, I was like, this was supposed to be a secular scholarly show, but apparently the Spirit is going to enter into the conversation as well. And so it happened very organically. But then, of course, you had your 6 months where you were out of the church. I essentially was an atheist for like, I don't know, you've seen my Mormon Stories interview at least a dozen years. I'm trying to, in my mind, I'm trying to think like, how long was I an atheist for? But I was for over 10 years at least. I would definitely have been an atheist.
More in my interview.
Exactly. And so, yeah, it's what I've been learning is I'm on a faith journey too. And so I'm just wondering, you decide to start a podcast. Let's lead up to that. And is this part of your faith journey?
Yeah. So, I think the more research and the more study I've done into church history and the truth claims, the more I realize that there's so much I don't know. And I think there needs to be an element of humility, and there's more nuance and complexity. than whenever I first left the church. I was 100% a critic. I thought, the CS letter is all there is sort of to it. And I felt like I knew for 100% that it all wasn't true. And I felt like I could debunk anybody. And I hadn't really given both sides a fair look. If I'm being completely honest, I looked a bit at apologetics, but I just kind of threw everything out very quickly. But what prompted me to start the channel was, I've continued over the years. I still listen to podcasts. I still listen to Mormon stories. I like Mormon stories. I love the interviews. And I enjoy hearing pushback and having my faith challenged. And if it's true, it can withhold criticism and investigation. We shouldn't be afraid of research. And I believe strongly in that. But I was listening to the LDS discussion series, and it started to shake my faith again.
Okay.
Intellectually, more so. I wouldn't say that I was going through an emotional crisis, but intellectually, I was like, they're bringing up some really good, fair criticisms against the church. And I was like, I need to honestly navigate my way through and come to some conclusion. How can I make sense of some of these things? And also I'd had some discussions with family members who have either left the church or who are leaving, bringing up a lot of these same issues. And I'm aware of a lot of them, and they're getting some of the details wrong. But then whenever I would answer, I was like, yeah, that is kind of an issue. I empathize. I think this is what the faithful response would be. But I wasn't just trying to just outright defend the church. And a lot of the time I realized that, I've actually shelved a lot of things, and I don't have really good, convincing intellectual answers. And the other thing that prompted me to start the channel was we did a debate. I was training this year to be a teacher, doing a PGCE, and we had a debate week at school. So we picked a topic and we debated, and we looked at what makes a good debate. And it's like, well, you look at the arguments for and the arguments against, you look at the evidence to support it. And then when you look at both sides objectively and fairly, then you can come to an informed decision or conclusion. And so that I made those connections with Mormonism, with church history. And I felt that I need to really try to navigate my way through. I want to look at everything critics have to say, everything apologists have to say, and then try to come to some conclusion. So I made a big presentation on the first vision. It only took me about 2 days, to be honest, because these things have been going around in my head. It was over like 100 slides. And I just went to looking at critical arguments, some apologetic responses. And then whenever I did it, I was like, this was a lot of work for nothing. I was like, I should record myself going through this. And then I had the idea that I should do a channel that tries to be objective and fair and to look at both sides. Because I think the one thing I found with the different channels I was watching is bit of bias on both sides, and they only want to cite the information that supports their position. And I was noticing that a little bit with both sides, and I wanted to try to do neither and both, if that makes sense. And if people are really trying to follow the truth, come to a decision on the evidence of the history of the truth claims, let's try to share both sides. And truly my goal with starting this channel is not to harm people's faith. If I wanted to, I could just be super critical. I could do that. But for me, I want to try to navigate my way through and find answers. But I also want I think people should be aware about church history. I think they should be aware about the controversial aspects. And the church hasn't been fully transparent and forthright in its history. There's so many things that I didn't know. I was in the church 22 years, served a mission, studied the scriptures, and people should be aware of this information, in my view.
Yeah, and that's I always tell people, it's your birthright. Your history of your church, it's your birthright to know your history. And that's why the work that the Tanners did over the last 50, 60 years was invaluable. And of course, now we see the Gospel Topics essays that the church is acknowledging many of these things too. So it's moving in that direction. Probably not as quickly as you'd like to see it go, but and that's the thing. Like, what I find interesting is that you kind of have the same spirit that I have, which is try to be an unbiased person. And that's why I got reached out to you, because I'm like, hey, he's the Northern Ireland version of me in one sense, although you're a member of the church and I'm outside of it. But it's cool what the effort that you're putting into this. Now, let me just ask you a few questions, because now you start up this podcast. Now, what's been some of your biggest surprises? Like you started this YouTube channel a couple months ago. Just you're still fresh. This is all still new to you. It's exciting. Just talk a little bit about that.
Oh, biggest surprises. I think getting the audio and video stuff right has been a lot
Struggle.
than what I thought. I'm not a technical expert at all. I'm just starting out. I'm hoping to get better. I think some of the surprises has actually been people have been watching my videos. It's still small, but genuinely whenever I started, although you kind of start like you kind of hope to get a lot of people watching, and my channel's still really small, but you're kind of surprised when people do start watching at the same time. So that's been, I suppose, kind of nice. And it's been really awesome to get, I got Dan Vogel and Brian Hales and also Robert Boylan to come on and do an interview with me. And I was super pumped about that because whenever I first started reaching out to people, if they'd want to come on and do an interview, I got quite a few people either not responding or rejecting, and you start to think like, oh, I'm a nobody, nobody's going to come on, who's going to listen to me? And it was super cool to do interviews with those guys and to have just a really good discussion and like a good, I felt, even though Dan's more of a critic, Brian's an apologist, that I felt like both were really interesting and fun and important and edifying discussions. And I just don't like the us versus them mentality that there can be between critics and apologists or members and non-members or ex-Mormons and Mormons. And I think that's probably been one of the hardest things is I have been getting criticism, to my channel or some of my videos from people on both sides, far on both sides, which you kind of have to get thick skin.
Yeah.
But at first
and that's what's so amazing to me is this is see, you're at this point where I was at, last summer. I have a little over 100 subscribers. I've booked Richard Bushman to come on my program. I mean, the channel, I'm talking to John DeLynn and all these big names and people in the church and Community of Christ. And one of the cool things about where your channel's at right now is that you basically have like 150, 200 subscribers. These are the core of your channel. The first people that find your channel are the people that get really, really deep in the weeds, who geek out over this, are really into it. So you have the people that are your first 150, 200, 500, whatever. These are people that they know their stuff too. So you have this really high quality audience and a very knowledgeable audience because they found you. And that's the key thing. If the people that find the guy with 100 subscribers, that means they really are searching. So you actually have right now like a really cool core group of people that you can build upon. That's my observation.
No, it's so true. So true.
And then, I run into people like when I was in Utah, it's like, came up to one of my meetups. Yeah, I watched you almost from the beginning. I'm like, wow. And then they make their time to come and meet me. So then you have this weird thing where all of a sudden, like, even though I still only had like 150, 200 subscribers, like where I'm at, I start responding to people like on Reddit, and people are like, oh, I can't believe you responded to my post. And like, what? And then it gets surreal. Yeah. What's that like? What's it like just to now you've put yourself out there, people are now responding to you. How does that feel?
It's kind of cool. It's a mixed bag. I'd say most of the time I'm getting compliments and people thanking me for, my content, for, the work that I'm doing. I'm, getting praise for the interviews I've done. Obviously, it's hard to completely eliminate your bias. I try my best to be fair and objective. I've gotten some criticism from both sides, either that I lean too faithful or too pro church, and I've got
good spot to be.
Some haters. But then I've also gotten some ones who are very strong on the apologetic side who think, oh, you're secretly a wolf in sheep's clothing, or you're too critical, shouldn't be even talking about the critical arguments, you could be harming faith. So people are quite extreme on both sides who don't really like me, but those who are maybe more middle of the road, who are more nuanced, I think have been quite appreciative. But I've been surprised by the number of members from my stake who have said to me that they've been watching. Whenever I was at a Ward barbecue on Monday, and a few of them were asking me about my channel and asking me questions to do with things with church history, like the Book of Abraham or Joseph Searstone. It was kind of like, it was nice that people are being open and interested, and I've gotten very few people who I know personally have a go at me about my channel. Just, random strangers, but most people have been really supportive. And
Yep. I know a podcaster, pretty well known one, that nobody in his ward even knows what he's doing. And because he doesn't want it to get out there, because he's worried maybe something could happen that causes a controversy, and maybe then he gets the attention of the bishop. Are you worried at all that what you're doing could get you in trouble?
Yeah, I've obviously thought about it. I thought as I've been doing this that some of the episodes I do aren't the most faith promoting, because I'm trying to be objective. I'm trying to show both the critical arguments and hear some faithful responses. But I recognize that this might harm some people's faith. And I think that adds a bit of responsibility as well, that I don't want to damage people's faith. But I also don't want to hold back from sharing, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let's look at both sides, sort of thing. But I try to be very careful in my sort of analysis. I try not to attack the church. I try not to do anything that would probably get me in trouble with, local leadership per se. But at the same time, I don't just defend the church or always go with, like, there will be times where I'll say, I don't think this is a good apologetic response. But I think most of the time, there's two interpretations you can take from the evidence sometimes. And I like to say, you take whichever interpretation you think makes most sense, which feels right to you, intellectually, spiritually. And some people have said that my video has helped them in their faith. And I've actually been surprised. I'm like, really, that video? I haven't found it super faith promoting. But that's been nice as well. That I've gotten that positive feedback as well.
Now, I just want to ask you a little bit of a familial dynamic here, if you don't mind, and if you're not comfortable answering it, that's fine. But you had a sister who basically, she gave you all this information, kind of caused your shelf to break. So I'm assuming she's out of the church, and then you have a father who's a faithful member. What do they think of the channel?
So I've not talked about it too much with my sister who's left the church. One of my other sisters, she's also gone through a bit of a faith crisis, and she's not attending. She's watched a couple of my episodes. In general, I think she thinks it's good that I'm being sort of like fair and objective, and I'm talking about the history. I remember my dad, he sent me a message after one video, and I thought this was kind of funny, because he said, I don't get, are you trying to defend the church? Are you trying to attack the church? Or are you doing neither? And I was like, exactly. I was like, I'm glad that you're confused, because I'm trying to eliminate my bias as much as I can. And I've actually had a few people saying to me, like, I've really enjoyed that video, but which side are you on?
Yeah.
I don't always like to give it away, because I'm just trying to be more objective. So I think my channel is more of an intellectual than a spiritual sort of pursuit. But there's times where I might interject like spiritual thoughts as well. But no issues really with my family. My wife's been very supportive as well. She's very strong in her faith, and she doesn't struggle with the things that I struggle with. And at times I'm like, why doesn't this bother you? But she's been super supportive of what I'm doing. So that's been a big help as well.
Well, that's great. Now, are you wearing a hockey jersey?
Yep.
Let me see it. Oh, Canada. Oh, that's lovely. That's so awesome. And of course, did you buy that when you were on your mission?
I did. Had to get it.
So you love Canada. Apparently your dad does, probably, right? You feel like it's almost like a second country to you, a second home?
Yeah, I could have seen myself going back and living there. But the winter is just, you get so sick of the snow. It's like 6 months of snow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, I think it's really cool what you're doing. I think, it's funny. Like, okay, what are you doing? That's like, you're an evangelical. And of course, you're going to be interviewing me in a little bit. And so we can tease that. But that was like when I first started, I literally had this, like when I would have somebody on the Zoom call to introduce myself, I would have to explain for a half an hour what I'm doing. And even then, like, well, okay. And there would be people like Mark Elwood, when I reached out to him with his the graphic novel, the Glass Looker. It's like, man, when I saw you're an evangelical, I was like, what? And now I don't have to do that anymore, because now people understand, oh, NBR, Mormon Book Feeds. Oh, I know where he's coming from. That's what's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
is once you've so you got this really cool niche that you got going here where you're and kind of like Rick Bennett, he's kind of in the same spot where he says, yeah, I get attacked from the right and the left. And he said, and that's right where I want to be. People who are anti or pro, that they equally kind of deride him. So I think that's a good place for you to be too, because it sounds to me like you're trying to be fair and balanced, and you're trying to just be as neutral as you can be, knowing that you are a member of the church. And I think it's important, people know that, and they do. So you're a member, and you're exploring these ideas. And I think it's good because there's a lot of people out there that aren't going to watch an anti-show and maybe miss out some information, whereas you're going to be able to present historical things that are based in true history, in reality, and do it in a way that can introduce these topics. Like I tell people, I said, you would much rather hear what I have to say about maybe some of my biblical deconstruction, some of the views that I have about biblical scholarship. It's probably better you hear it from me than you hear it from an atheist. And it's kind of the same thing. Like you're going to use materials that might be viewed as critical, but they're also based in factual stuff. And I think that's where you can find that really cool sweet spot. I know I'm talking, but I just love helping and giving advice to new folk. And I think what you're doing is fantastic. As a matter of fact, you probably don't even need advice from me, because it sounds to me like you're on the right track. Like I told you off camera, and I mentioned it to you, the most important person, your show is for an audience of one. It's for you. And anybody that wants to come along for the ride, they can join. But really, you want to do the show be something you'd want to watch. And you've created something that I want to watch.
I think for both of us, I think you'd be similar to me, that it's your personal interest and passion and fascination for the church and its history and, faith and religion. That is sort of like the main driver. Mm-hmm. I think that's the main motivation. And it's been super fun to explore this hobby or passion of mine. And one listener did say to me, in response to something you brought up, that she said, I think this is a good resource to share with my believing family and friends. I think she left the church, but she said, I think this is a good way to share it with them. So some of the more controversial parts of history, but not in a way like the CS letter that's just going to attack them and just lead them out of the church. I try my best to try to be objective. Obviously, I'm not a historian. I don't know everything, and there's maybe times unintentionally where maybe I get something wrong. But I say the majority of the time I try to be accurate with the information that I'm sharing. I'm careful with my sources, get them from reliable places.
Well, the most important thing is have fun. As long as you're having fun and enjoying this, then it's not a job. It's just it's a joy. It can be a very joyful thing. It can be a very fun thing, and just that's the key thing, is have fun at the center of it.
Yeah, will do.
So, was there anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I don't think so. Like if you're probably to ask me like where is my faith right now currently, and I think I maybe alluded to it, but I would say that I'm still a believer. I would say I have faith. I wouldn't say that I have certainty or sure knowledge. I wouldn't say that I know things, even though I would say that I've had some spiritual experiences or answers to prayer, which I don't know how to deny or explain away. There's possibility, there are coincidences or elevation emotion. I've thought about those things, but I've chosen to believe, and I genuinely, for me, believe that when I die, I believe there's going to be an afterlife. I believe I'm going to meet God. I believe there's going to be a Jesus. I believe I'll see my mom again. To me, that's what I believe. But I still have issues. I still have doubts. I still have things on my shelf that I'm trying to work through and trying to navigate my way through. So you could say I'm maybe more progressive or nuanced. But I kind of see myself as a believer who struggles with unbelief and doubt at times. And I'm just trying to navigate my way through. But one thing I'm trying to do, which my wife encouraged me, is while I'm doing this intellectual pursuit or navigation, still try to include God in the journey. Keep reading scriptures, keep praying, keep going to church. Don't include God in this faith journey and in this discovery. Be open to the divine and spiritual answers as well as intellectual. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to, be careful and take things slow and not rush to any fast conclusion.
So another question is, what do you where do you see yourself a year from now? What kind of improvements you like to make to the channel? You plan on doing some upgrades? What are some, do you have like an idea? Like I don't really have a plan, but I just want to know, do you kind of have a plan of where you want to be like 6 months from now, a year from now?
I would like to improve, like my camera, my microphone. I've got a friend who says he might help me with that. Any donations people could give would be helpful. But see, since I've started doing interviews, I have absolutely loved doing interviews. And I still want to do my own research and sort of pick a church history topic. That was originally my plan. And then just do maybe the odd interview on the side to support that. But I would love and could see myself going more into interviewing. It's a lot more fun having experts and people who know so much more than I do talk about it, and you can just ask questions rather than be the one that has to do all the research and put everything together, and then you have to talk. Like, it's exhausting if you record a 30-minute video of you just talking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, we're going to talk about, because I had a similar kind of thing with my channel, but we'll talk about that in the interview. So folks, this is what we're going to do. Now, I'm not sure how exactly we're going to coordinate this. This is a work in progress, a lot of gears going on here. But what we're going to try to do is kind of maybe coordinate the release of our episodes. How we do it, we'll figure it out. But basically, I want you guys to stay tuned, because I'm now going to be a guest on your program, and you're going to interview me. And so this is really cool. I gave you the opportunity to talk to me about some things that I haven't talked about on camera. So I thought I'm going to give this guy a shot and let him roll. And it's really cool that you're doing this. I just want to remind but thanks for coming on today. Yeah,
thanks so much for having me, Stephen. I absolutely I loved your interview with John Dehlin. I listened to it all. You seem just like such a really nice, genuine guy. And even though that you're an evangelical Christian, I felt like some connection in our faith journeys. And yeah, you just come across like a really humble, sincere guy when we've talked off the air, on the air. And I've really appreciated you having me on to try to help me as well, help me with my channel and just to get to know each other. And also your channel is really good. I've been starting to listen to a lot of your videos, and it's really good. So definitely, listeners, subscribe to his channel.
Thank you. I appreciate that, man. That's cool. Mormonism with the Murph. It's an awesome channel. Check it out. I'm going to provide a link in the description to the interview that you'll be doing. I'll also put it on the end screen. I also want to remind my audience to don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell when a new video comes out. We are on all the major podcast formats. We're working on uploading the audio. We're having some issues there, but we do have quite a bit of stuff on the podcast format. Also, if you want to support the channel, go to the merch store, MormonBookReviews.com. If you want to support us financially, you can go down in the links and support us via PayPal or Patreon. I just did a Patreon special video yesterday. I do exclusive content, or I sometimes do early releases of interviews, like maybe this one. My Patreons would be able to see ahead of time. So if you, and also I'm doing things with my Patreons where I'm going to do one-on-one Zoom calls with my Patreons. And it doesn't matter what tier you're on. If you want to be a Patreon and you want to do an infrequent Zoom with me once a month or whatever, we're going to do that too. So either way, don't forget, folks, all the voices of the restoration will be heard on Mormon Book Reviews.